The first gunshot barely missed Eleanor Wilson's carriage, splintering the wooden frame just inches from where she gripped the edge of her seat. It was May 1878, and she'd been warned not to travel the treacherous roads from Santa Fe to Durango alone. Now, as a second shot rang out and her driver slumped forward, she realized the terrible cost of her stubbornness. Eleanor lunged for the reins as the horses panicked, their hooves thundering against the dusty trail. Through tear-blurred vision, she glimpsed 3 riders emerging from the rocky outcropping ahead. Bandits. Her gloved hands trembled as she tried desperately to control the frightened team, but the carriage lurched violently as a wheel caught in a rut. The impact threw her sideways. Pain shot through her shoulder as she tumbled from the carriage onto the hard, packed earth. The world spun. Her valise burst open, scattering her meager possessions across the red dirt. The horses bolted, dragging the damaged carriage away as she struggled to her feet. Blood trickled down her temple. The bandits were closing in. 24 years of life, and this was how it would end alone in the wilderness, another nameless victim of the untamed West. A thunderous crack split the air. One of the approaching riders jerked backward in his saddle, then toppled to the ground. The others reined their horses sharply, scanning the hills. Another shot, and a second bandit clutched his arm, wheeling his mount around in retreat. The third followed, dust billowing behind them as they fled. Eleanor stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. A horseman emerged from the brush-covered slope to her right, rifle in hand. Tall and broad-shouldered, he guided his chestnut stallion down the incline with practiced ease. His face was shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but she could feel his eyes assessing her. "You're bleeding, madam," he said, his voice deep and steady as he dismounted. "Those men might come back with friends. We need to move." Eleanor touched her temple, her fingers coming away red. "My driver dead, I'm afraid. No time for proper burial. The coyotes will have company tonight." He knelt, gathering her scattered belongings with efficient movements. "Who are you?" she managed, still dazed. "Ethan Ironwood." He straightened, towering over her. The sun caught his features now, a strong jaw darkened with stubble, eyes the color of a summer storm, and a thin scar tracing his left cheekbone. "Most folks just call me Iron. Eleanor Wilson." She swayed slightly, light-headed from the fall, his hand shot out, steadying her. "You've had a rough go of it, Miss Wilson. Let's get you somewhere safe before you collapse." Eleanor stiffened, pride cutting through her shock. "I'm perfectly capable of standing right now, barely." His tone softened. "I've got a camp a few miles west. Clean water, food, and no company that shoots at strangers. After that, I can take you to Durango if that's where you're headed." Eleanor hesitated, eyeing the stranger. Accepting help from an unknown man went against everything she'd been taught, but the alternative was certain death in the wilderness. "I'm afraid," she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. The cowboy's weathered face softened slightly as he secured her valise to his saddle. "Fear dies beside me, Miss Wilson. I give you my word." He extended a calloused hand. "Can you ride?" Eleanor nodded, allowing him to help her mount. She settled behind him, hesitantly placing her hands at his waist as he urged the horse forward. "Hold tight," he instructed. "It's rough country between here and comfort." As they rode, the rhythm of the horse's movements and her own exhaustion lulled Eleanor toward unconsciousness. She found herself leaning against the cowboy's back, her cheek pressed against rough leather that smelled of smoke and sage. "Stay with me, Miss Wilson," his voice rumbled through his chest. "Tell me what brings a lady like yourself out here alone." Eleanor forced her eyes open. "I'm to be the new schoolteacher in Durango." "Schoolteacher?" There was a hint of amusement in his voice. "Didn't figure you for the type." "And what type would that be, Mr. Ironwood? The kind that survives out here." He guided the horse around a steep ravine. "This territory eats tenderfeet for breakfast." "I'm more resilient than I appear," she replied, though her throbbing head undermined her conviction. "That much is clear." "You're still breathing." They rode in silence until the sun began its descent behind the distant mountains. True to his word, Ethan guided them to a small camp nestled in a protected hollow near a narrow stream. A simple lean-to stood against a rock face, and a fire pit ringed with stones waited for evening flames. He helped her dismount, his hands firm at her waist. Eleanor's legs nearly buckled beneath her, and he caught her again, stronger this time. "Easy now," he murmured, guiding her to a fallen log beside the fire pit. "Sit while I tend to that cut." Eleanor touched her temple again, surprised to find the blood had dried into a crusty streak down her face. Ethan moved with the efficiency of a man accustomed to self-reliance, gathering water from the stream and retrieving a small leather kit from his saddlebags. "This will sting," he warned, dampening a clean cloth. Eleanor flinched as he cleaned the wound, his touch gentler than she'd expected from such rough hands. "It's not deep," he pronounced, examining the cut. "Head wounds just bleed something fierce. You're lucky." "Lucky," she repeated hollowly. "My possessions scattered, my transportation gone, and my driver dead. I'd hate to see what unlucky looks like, Mr. Ironwood." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "You're alive, Miss Wilson. Out here, that's as lucky as it gets some days." He applied a salve to her wound, his fingertips surprisingly tender against her skin. "And please call me Ethan. Mr. Ironwood makes me feel like I'm in trouble with my schoolteacher." Despite herself, Eleanor smiled. "Then you must call me Eleanor." As dusk settled over the landscape, Ethan built a small fire and prepared a simple meal of beans, jerky, and coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. Eleanor ate gratefully, realizing how hungry she'd become. "Why did you help me?" she asked finally, cradling the tin cup of coffee between her palms. Ethan stared into the flames, his profile sharp against the gathering darkness. "My father taught me never to ride past trouble if I could help," said a man who does that isn't much of a man at all. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "Was," Ethan corrected quietly. "Apache raid 12 years back, I'm sorry," he shrugged. "It's the way of things out here." He poked the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "What about you?" "What brings a proper Eastern lady to teach in a dusty mining town?" Eleanor hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. "There was nothing left for me in Boston." Ethan's gaze was too perceptive. "Someone broke your heart, in a manner of speaking." She set her cup down. "My fiancé died of typhoid fever 3 days before our wedding. Afterward, I couldn't bear the pity in everyone's eyes. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Durango, it seemed providential. Running away then." Eleanor bristled. "I prefer to think of it as seeking a new beginning." "Fair enough," he smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. "We all have ghosts, Eleanor. Some we outrun, some we learn to live with." Their conversation drifted to lighter topics as night descended fully. Eleanor found herself surprisingly comfortable in this stranger's company, his straightforward manner a refreshing change from the polite deceptions of Boston society. When exhaustion finally overtook her, Ethan offered her the lean-to while he slept by the fire. Despite her protests, he insisted, and Eleanor was too tired to argue further. She settled onto the bedroll he'd prepared, wrapped in a wool blanket that smelled of him smoke, leather, and something indefinably masculine. "Sleep well, Eleanor," he said from the darkness. "We've got ground to cover tomorrow." Morning came with birdsong and the scent of coffee. Eleanor emerged from the lean-to to find Ethan already awake, frying salt pork in a small pan over fresh flames. He nodded in greeting, his hair damp from washing in the stream. "How's the head?" he asked, handing her a cup of coffee. Eleanor touched the tender spot gingerly. "Better, I think." "Good. We should reach Durango by nightfall if we push on." As they ate breakfast, Eleanor studied her rescuer in the clear morning light. Without yesterday's adrenaline clouding her judgment, she could see that Ethan Ironwood was a handsome man, probably in his early 30s. His face was tanned from years under the western sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more than his serious demeanor indicated. "What?" he asked, catching her gaze. Eleanor flushed. I was just wondering what you do, Ethan, when you're not rescuing damsels in distress. Bit of this, bit of that. He sipped his coffee. Been working as a scout for the army. Before that, drove cattle from Texas, prospected for a spell. He shrugged. Jack of all trades, master of none. A drifter, then. I prefer free spirit, he said with a wry smile. Roots never suited me much. They broke camp efficiently, Ethan teaching Eleanor how to properly extinguish the fire and leave minimal trace of their presence. As he helped her mount his horse, his hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Eleanor pretended not to notice the warmth that spread through her at his touch. The day's ride was more pleasant than the previous one. Eleanor's headache had subsided to a dull throb, and the scenery was breathtaking red rock formations jutting dramatically against azure skies, valleys carpeted with spring wildflowers, and distant mountains crowned with lingering snow. It's beautiful, she said softly as they paused to rest the horse at midday. Ethan nodded, passing her a canteen. That it is. Different kind of beautiful than what you're used to, I expect. Boston has its charms, but nothing like this vastness. She gestured to the panorama before them. I feel simultaneously insignificant and infinite here. Ethan looked at her with new interest. Poetic for a schoolteacher. Teachers can be poetic, she countered with a smile. Though I'll admit, my students might be surprised to hear me wax lyrical about anything besides proper grammar and arithmetic. Strict, are you? Firm but fair, she corrected. Children need boundaries and guidance, especially in places where life can be unpredictable, like Durango. Ethan's expression grew serious. You should know what you're riding into, Eleanor. It's not like the mining towns you might have read about. The silver strike last year brought all kinds prospectors, gamblers, outlaws looking to prey on the lucky ones. The school board might want a teacher, but they're fighting an uphill battle against saloons and brothels. Eleanor straightened her spine. All the more reason those children need education. Knowledge is the only true path out of ignorance and poverty. Ethan studied her for a long moment. You've got grit, I'll give you that. Just be careful. Town like that, a woman alone draws attention. I can take care of myself, she insisted, like yesterday. His eyebrow rose, Eleanor flushed. That was unusual circumstances. That was the West, he corrected gently. Beautiful 1 minute, deadly the next. Never forget that. They continued their journey, the conversation turning to Ethan's experiences in the territory. He told her of Navajo medicine men who could predict storms days in advance, of mountain lions that followed travelers for miles without ever being seen, of ghost towns abandoned when mines ran dry. Eleanor found herself captivated, not just by the stories but by the storyteller. Beneath his rugged exterior, Ethan possessed a keen intelligence and unexpected eloquence. He spoke of the land with the reverence of a man who'd found his church in open skies and rugged mountains. By late afternoon, they crested a ridge, and Ethan reined the horse to a stop. Below them, nestled in a valley carved by a winding river, lay Durango. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see it was a town in the throes of rapid growth, new buildings rising alongside hastily constructed tents and shanties, smoke curling from dozens of chimneys, and the glint of railroad tracks snaking toward the southern horizon. There she is, Ethan said. Not much to look at, but there's money flowing through those streets. Eleanor felt a flutter of anxiety. The reality of her new life suddenly loomed large before her. It's bigger than I expected. Having second thoughts, schoolteacher, she squared her shoulders. Not at all, just adjusting my expectations. Ethan chuckled. That's the spirit. They descended toward the town, joining a well-traveled road that grew increasingly busy as they approached. Wagons loaded with timber and supplies passed them, along with prospectors leading mule trains and merchants bringing goods to sell to the burgeoning population. Eleanor became acutely aware of her disheveled appearance, her dress stained with dirt and blood, her hair falling from its pins after 2 days without proper attention. I must look a fright, she murmured. You look like someone who survived. Ethan replied simply. As they entered the outskirts of Durango, the noise and bustle increased dramatically. The main street was crowded with horses, wagons, and people going about their business. Buildings in various stages of construction lined the thoroughfare, and the sharp reports of hammers and saws filled the air. Ethan guided his horse expertly through the chaos. "Where are you supposed to report in?" the school board chairman, Mr. Hollister. "His office is above the Mercantile, according to my correspondence." They found the Mercantile easily enough, a large two-story building with a freshly painted sign. Ethan dismounted and helped Eleanor down, their bodies close for a moment before he stepped back. "Well," he said awkwardly, "I suppose this is where we part ways." Eleanor felt an unexpected pang at his words. "Yes, thank you, Ethan, for everything," he nodded, his expression unreadable. "It was nothing. It was my life," she corrected softly. "I won't forget that." A moment of silence stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Finally, Ethan cleared his throat. "I should go, got business at the livery." He hesitated, then added, "Take care of yourself, Eleanor Wilson." Before she could respond, he swung back into his saddle and guided his horse away, disappearing into the crowded street without looking back. Eleanor stood watching until he was completely out of sight, an odd emptiness settling in her chest. Gathering her composure, she entered the Mercantile. The proprietor directed her upstairs to Mr. Hollister's office, where she was greeted with surprise and concern over her appearance. She explained about the bandit attack, carefully omitting certain details about her rescuer. "My word, Miss Wilson, what a terrible ordeal," Hollister exclaimed. "We had begun to worry when you didn't arrive as scheduled." "I apologize for the delay in my disheveled state," Eleanor said. "Not at all, my dear. We're simply relieved you've arrived safely." Hollister, a portly man with mutton chop sideburns, shuffled through some papers on his desk. "We've arranged lodging for you with Mrs. Pembroke, a respectable widow who takes in boarders. The school term doesn't begin for another 2 weeks, so you'll have time to settle in and prepare." After completing the necessary paperwork, Hollister escorted Eleanor to Mrs. Pembroke's boarding house, a neat two-story structure on a relatively quiet side street. The widow was a brisk, efficient woman who showed Eleanor to a small but clean room with actual furniture, a luxury after her wilderness adventure. "Baths down the hall," Mrs. Pembroke explained. "Dinner's at 6 sharp. No gentlemen callers in private rooms and no coming in after 10 o'clock. "Any questions?" Eleanor shook her head, too exhausted to do more than thank the woman. When Mrs. Pembroke left, she sank onto the narrow bed, the events of the past 2 days finally catching up with her. The hot bath that followed was pure bliss, washing away the dirt and grime of the trail. That night at dinner, she met her fellow boarders, 2 shop girls, an elderly bookkeeper, and a young widow working as a seamstress. They peppered her with questions about her journey, which she answered with edited highlights. No one needed to know about the tall cowboy with storm-gray eyes who had occupied her thoughts since their parting. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Eleanor threw herself into preparing for the school term, meeting with parents, ordering supplies, and setting up the one-room schoolhouse at the edge of town. She tried not to look for Ethan among the cowboys and drifters who passed through Durango's streets, telling herself their brief encounter had been nothing more than happenstance. Yet sometimes at night, when the sounds of the raucous saloons drifted through her window, she found herself wondering where he was, if he was safe, if he ever thought of her. The first day of school arrived with 28 pupils ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. Eleanor stood before them in her best dress, determined to make a good impression. By day's end, her throat was sore from talking and her hand cramped from writing on the chalkboard, but she felt a sense of purpose that had eluded her since leaving Boston. Weeks turned into months. Eleanor settled into the rhythms of Durango, earning respect for her dedication to her students and her refusal to be intimidated by the rougher elements of the boomtown. She joined the Ladies' Aid Society, attended church socials, and gradually built a life for herself. Still, she couldn't deny the hollow feeling that sometimes woke her in the night, a sense that something or someone was missing. It was late September when she heard his name again. She was shopping in the mercantile when two miners behind her mentioned a skirmish with renegade Apache in the hills to the north. Army scouts spotted him first, one said. Fellow named Ironwood, got shot for his troubles but managed to warn the patrol. Eleanor's heart stuttered. "Excuse me," she interrupted, turning to face the surprised miners. "This scout Ethan Ironwood, is he alive?" The older miner nodded slowly. "Last I heard. They brought him to Doc Sullivan's place yesterday. Pretty bad shape, though." Eleanor abandoned her shopping basket and hurried out, making straight for the doctor's office on the corner of 2nd and Main. The receptionist, recognizing the school teacher, nodded when Eleanor asked about Ethan. "Doc's got him in the back room. Not taking visitors, though." "Please," Eleanor said, her voice tight. We're old friends." Something in her expression must have convinced the woman, who sighed and nodded toward the hallway. 5 minutes. He needs rest more than company." The back room was dim and smelled of carbolic acid. Ethan lay motionless on a narrow bed, his face pale against the white pillowcase. A bandage wrapped his bare shoulder and chest, spots of blood seeping through the linen. Eleanor approached quietly, her heart in her throat. His eyes fluttered open at her footsteps. For a moment, confusion clouded his features, then recognition dawned. "Eleanor." His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "Hello, Ethan." She moved closer, fighting the urge to touch him. "I heard you were injured." "Nothing serious," he lied, wincing as he tried to shift position. "Just a scratch. Of course, men like you don't get seriously wounded, do you?" She couldn't keep the tremor from her voice. "Just like they don't put down roots or worry about tomorrow." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Been thinking about me, schoolteacher." "Don't flatter yourself," she replied, though her eyes betrayed her. "Durango's a small town. People talk. And what do they say about Eleanor Wilson, the Boston lady who's taming the wild youth of the frontier?" "Nothing half as interesting as what they say about Ethan Ironwood, the Army scout who sees danger around every corner." His expression sobered. "Not every corner, just the ones where it's hiding." He studied her face. "You look well, Eleanor. Teaching suits you?" "Thank you." She hesitated, then asked the question that had haunted her for months. "Why didn't you say goodbye properly?" Ethan's gaze shifted to the ceiling. "Didn't see the point. You had your new life waiting, I had the trail. And now I've got a hole in my shoulder and nowhere particular to be until it heals." His eyes returned to hers, intense despite his weakened state. "Why are you here, Eleanor?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibilities. Eleanor took a deep breath. "Because when I heard you were hurt, I realized I've been waiting for you to ride back into town since the day you left." The confession cost her dearly. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment as silence stretched between them. Finally, Ethan reached out, his hand finding hers. "I circled back to Durango 3 times since May," he admitted quietly. "Watched you leaving the schoolhouse once. You were laughing with some of your students." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "You looked happy. I didn't want to complicate that. And if I told you I wanted complications." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. A slow smile spread across his face. "I'd say you're braver than I gave you credit for." The door opened behind them and the doctor entered, frowning at Eleanor. "Miss Wilson, my patient needs rest, not visitors batting their eyelashes at him." Eleanor straightened, embarrassed to be caught holding Ethan's hand. "Of course, doctor, I was just leaving." She gently withdrew her fingers from Ethan's grasp. "Get well, Mr. Ironwood." "Eleanor," he called as she reached the door. She turned back. "I'll find you when I'm on my feet." "See that you do," she replied, unable to suppress her smile. It was nearly 3 weeks before Ethan appeared at the schoolhouse door. Eleanor was erasing the chalkboard after dismissing her students when she felt a presence behind her. She turned to find him leaning against the door frame, his left arm still in a sling but color returned to his face. "Mr. Ironwood," she acknowledged, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I see you've recovered." Well enough to come calling, he replied, stepping into the room. He looked different in clean clothes, dark trousers, a blue shirt with the sleeve altered to accommodate his bandaged shoulder, and boots that had actually seen polish. His hair was trimmed, his face freshly shaven. "You clean up nicely," she observed, setting down the eraser. Figured a schoolteacher might appreciate a man who doesn't look like he slept in a barn. He approached her desk, his gait still favoring his injured side. "I was hoping you might join me for dinner." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Pembroke doesn't allow gentlemen callers after 6. "I wasn't planning on calling at your boarding house," he replied. "The new hotel has a proper dining room, white tablecloths and everything." My, you have been making an effort." Eleanor gathered her books, buying time while her pulse settled. And what would Durango think of the schoolteacher dining out with the mysterious scout? "They'd probably think it's about time," he said quietly. "Unless you're concerned about your reputation." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "My reputation can withstand dinner with a hero of the territory." "I'm no hero, Eleanor. You saved my life. That makes you my hero at least." She gathered her shawl. "What time shall I be ready?" Ethan's smile was worth every moment of the 3 months she'd waited to see it again. 7 o'clock. "I'll collect you from Mrs. Pembroke's front parlor, proper as can be." Dinner at the Grand Hotel was indeed grand by Durango standards. The dining room featured actual glass windows, pressed tin ceilings, and a small ensemble playing gentle music in the corner. Eleanor wore her best dress, navy blue with lace at the collar and cuffs, and felt a surge of feminine satisfaction at the appreciation in Ethan's eyes when he first saw her. They talked for hours, filling in the months of separation. Ethan spoke of his scouting work, the increasing tensions with the remaining Apache bands, and his growing weariness with the nomadic life. "I've been thinking of settling," he admitted over coffee and apple pie. "Maybe buying some land outside town. The Army's offering parcels to veterans at fair prices." Eleanor tried to keep her expression neutral. "That's quite a change for a free spirit." "People change," he said simply. "Find reasons to put down roots." His meaning was clear in the way he held her gaze. Eleanor felt warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. "And what would you do with land?" she asked. "Become a farmer?" Ethan chuckled. "God, no. Horses, maybe. I've got a knack with them, and the stage companies are always looking for good stock." "A horse ranch," Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "It suits you." After dinner, they walked through town, the evening air crisp with the promise of autumn. Ethan offered his good arm, and Eleanor took it, hyper-aware of his solid presence beside her. "I enjoyed tonight," she said as they approached the boarding house, enough to consider doing it again. There was an uncharacteristic uncertainty in his voice. Eleanor stopped walking, turning to face him in the pool of light from a street lamp. "Ethan Ironwood, are you courting me?" He met her gaze steadily. "I believe I am, Miss Wilson, though I'll understand if a schoolteacher with your prospects might prefer someone more established." "My prospects?" Eleanor laughed softly. "I'm a spinster schoolteacher in a mining town, Ethan. My prospects are teaching multiplication tables until my hair turns gray." "You're the most beautiful, intelligent, courageous woman I've ever met," he countered, his voice dropping low. "Any man with sense would consider himself lucky to court you." The sincerity in his words stole her breath. "Then I suppose it's fortunate you have sense," she managed finally. His smile was slow and transformative. "Is that a yes to courting?" "Yes." She glanced toward the boarding house where the parlor lights still glowed. "Though Mrs. Pembroke will have strict rules about it." "I can handle strict rules." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "I've faced worse challenges." "Like what?" "Like riding away from you once," he said softly. "I don't intend to make that mistake again." Before Eleanor could respond, he leaned down and brushed his lips against hers, a kiss so gentle it might have been imagined, yet it sent her heart racing. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers. "I'm afraid," she whispered, echoing her words from months before. Afraid of the intensity of her feelings, afraid of losing someone she cared for again, afraid of the uncertain future. Ethan's hand cupped her cheek, his thumb tracing the curve of her jaw. "Fear dies beside me," he reminded her. "I made you that promise once, I mean to keep it." Their courtship progressed through the autumn months, punctuated by Sunday walks, dinners at the hotel, and chaperoned visits in Mrs. Pembroke's front parlor. Eleanor discovered sides to Ethan she'd never suspected: his dry humor, his passion for literature. He carried dog-eared copies of Shakespeare's sonnets and Whitman's Leaves of Grass in his saddlebags, his talent for sketching landscapes with a few deft strokes of charcoal. In turn, she shared with him her dreams beyond the schoolhouse of writing educational texts that might make learning more accessible to frontier children, of perhaps someday founding a proper academy in Durango when the town had grown enough to support one. By December, Ethan had purchased land 5 miles outside town, 100 acres with a natural spring and good grazing land. He spent his days building a modest house and corral, returning to town in the evenings with sawdust in his hair and satisfaction in his eyes. It was on Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside the church after the holiday service, that Ethan took Eleanor's gloved hands in his. "I've something to ask you," he said, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. Eleanor's heart leapt. "Yes, the house is finished. Nothing fancy, mind you, but solid. Good roof, tight walls, big fireplace." He paused, suddenly looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him. "It needs a woman's touch, though, curtains and such. Ethan Ironwood, are you asking me to help you decorate?" She teased, though she knew perfectly well what he was trying to say. He exhaled sharply. "I'm making a mess of this." Reaching into his coat pocket, he withdrew a small box. "Eleanor Wilson, I love you. Have since I watched you try to be brave with blood running down your face and 3 bandits bearing down on you." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band set with a small pearl. "Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Eleanor's vision blurred with tears. "You're asking me to leave the security of teaching, of town life, to live on a remote ranch with a former drifter?" Alarm flashed across his features until he caught the smile she couldn't suppress. "Yes," she continued. "Yes, I will marry you, Ethan Ironwood, former drifter and current keeper of my heart." Relief and joy transformed his face as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he pulled her close, his kiss deepening as snowflakes melted on their cheeks. They were married on New Year's Day, 1879, in the same church. The entire school board attended, along with Eleanor's students and their families. Even Mrs. Pembroke dabbed at her eyes during the ceremony, though she'd initially declared that Eleanor was throwing herself away on that wandering scout. Ethan's ranch house was indeed modest but sturdy, with large windows that captured the magnificent views of the mountains. Eleanor quickly transformed it with touches that reflected both their tastes, her books sharing shelves with his, handmade quilts brightening the bedroom, wildflowers in mason jars adorning the table when in season. By spring, Ethan had acquired his first breeding stock, 6 mares and a magnificent stallion that had once belonged to a Comanche chief. He proved to have a natural talent for horse breeding, developing a line known for intelligence and endurance. The stage companies sought his animals eagerly, and within 2 years, Ironwood horses were in demand throughout the territory. Eleanor continued teaching until the birth of their first child in 1880, a daughter they named Sarah after Ethan's mother. A son, William, followed 18 months later. Though no longer formally employed, Eleanor never abandoned education. She taught their children at home and opened their ranch to neighboring families whose children couldn't make the daily journey to town. As Durango grew with the silver boom and the arrival of the railroad, the Ironwood Ranch became known not just for its fine horses, but for the warmth of its hospitality. Travelers spoke of the handsome rancher and his educated wife, of their lively children and the impromptu school sessions that often took place on the wide front porch. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Ethan presented Eleanor with a leather-bound journal filled with his sketches, the schoolhouse, their ranch, their children, and page after page of Eleanor herself reading, laughing, sleeping, living the life they'd built together. "For the woman who taught me that some fears are worth facing," he'd inscribed on the first page. "Some roots worth planting, some loves worth risking everything for." That night, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, Eleanor leaned against her husband's shoulder. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The freedom, the open trail." Ethan's arm tightened around her. "Not for a moment," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple where a faint scar remained from their first meeting. "Besides, who says I'm not free? My territory's just changed, that's all." Eleanor smiled, thinking of the frightened woman who'd tumbled from a carriage all those years ago, and the man who taught her that fear was just the beginning of courage. "Fear dies beside me," she murmured, echoing his promise from long ago. Ethan's laugh rumbled through his chest. "These days, the only thing that dies beside you is my desire to be anywhere else." As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, their silhouettes merging into one against the lamplight spilling from the windows of the home. They'd built together a beacon of warmth in the vast wilderness they'd both learned to love.